Next, we have Jason Roth and Ann Hoffman, both with Colorado Department of Transportation. And Jason is an environmental project manager and ecologist for CDOT Region 4. And they're interested in all things ecological, with a professional emphasis on finding solutions for the intersection of transportation and the natural environment. Ann is an environmental technician and wildlife specialist with CDOT. And so both of them will be presenting today on understanding bat use of CDOT structures. So thank you both.
Thanks, Andrea. And thank you all for being here and for your interest in bats. I don't know that I'm a qualified spokesman, but speaking on behalf of the bats, it's really appreciated that you're all here and showing interest. So like Andrea said, Annie and I work in Region 4, which is basically the northeastern quarter of the state of Colorado. So that's where our work with bats started. So the origin of our study goes back to 2023, when we found out that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was considering adding these 3 species of bats to the Endangered Species Act list. And once added, these species of bats would be the first known listed bats with ranges to occur in Colorado. And of the 3, the tricolored bat would be the first to be listed, as has been discussed previously. So when we found out about this information, it prompted a lot of discussions amongst our work group about how this would affect CDOT's project delivery. And so the first step is we started to review existing literature about the species themselves, and then also just about general bat behavior in Colorado or the Rocky Mountain West. And we really couldn't find a lot of information specific to bat use of transportation structures in Colorado. So at that point, we sort of pivoted to actually going out and taking a look under and inside the structures in Colorado. And we had known previous to this that bats had utilized bridges, but we really didn't know how much and to what extent. So when we started to look underneath and inside these structures, we quickly realized that bats were using them a lot more than we had previously known, and that evidence was a lot easier to find than I had expected that it would be. So around the same time, we found the Species from Feces lab based out of Northern Arizona University, and you'll hear much more about them in the next presentation. But when we found out about the lab and what they could do, we reached out to Faith and ordered some single pellet sample vials to try and give it a sort of a test run to gauge the reliability and accuracy of their lab analysis. So throughout the course of the 2023 field season, the initial test runs that we did, we returned to the bridges where we had found evidence of guano. We took some samples, submitted them to the lab. Throughout the season, we submitted a total of 21 samples. The first sample actually came back too degraded for the lab to analyze, but they were able to analyze the remaining 20 down to the species level. And of those 20, 13 were positive for various species of bats. So this slide depicts the locations of the bat positive structures that we sampled, and then the colored stars represent the species that were found. So at the end of that initial test run field year, we had some lessons learned that we wanted to incorporate into future surveys and sampling efforts. The first being that we decided that for future sampling, we would no longer collect our samples from the ground underneath or inside the structure or any horizontal surfaces because it was too difficult to differentiate between rodent droppings and bat guano while in the field. So we vowed to just only collect guano from vertical surfaces like abutments and piers and girders underneath the bridges. The second lesson learned was that we were using the single pellet sample vials, and so we agreed that for future sampling efforts, we would only collect the darkest, moistest, and freshest piece of guano for viability for the lab. And then finally, at the time, we didn't realize that the PD fungus known to cause white nose syndrome could persist underneath these structures. So we hadn't really considered decontamination when we were out in the field. So we vowed to develop and implement a decontamination plan moving forward. But with the exciting results that we got from the lab, combined with sort of the lack of information we were finding specific to bats and their relationship with transportation structures in Colorado, we thought that this might make for a good expanded research project. So the next thing we did was we reached out to the bat experts and the wider bat conservation community to see if we were sort of on the right track with our idea to expand research. So we reached out to the Colorado Natural Heritage Program, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, USGSNA BAT, as well as Bat Conservation International. And we got pretty overwhelmingly positive support and encouragement that we should sort of proceed with our idea to expand this research. So next, we had to figure out where we were going to get funding for this. And originally, we considered several different grant programs until we realized that the solution was likely within our own agency. So CDOT has an Office of Applied Research that basically has funding that they provide to researchers, typically universities or consultants, that provide research in how to improve CDOT's operations and systems and processes. So we felt like that would be the program that might be a good fit for what we were looking to do. So over the winter of 2023 into 2024, we worked on drafting a proposal, or what's called a problem statement in that branch, which we then submitted to that agency, and it went through a couple rounds of voting, and I'm happy to say that it was formally awarded to us about middle of last year. And we defined our study area to be the eastern half of Colorado for a couple of reasons. The first being that based on the literature that we had reviewed, the tricolored bat, which if you remember, will be the first species to be listed, there had been no known occurrences west of the Continental Divide. And the other reason that we limited our study area to the eastern half of the state is that the team that we assembled to work on this research are all internal CDOT staff with other work duties. So we figured limiting it to the eastern half would cut down on travel and allow the employees to continue to work on their other work obligations. So this is a rough timeline of the 3-year study. And now Annie's going to come and talk a little bit more about the first field season and beyond.
Right. Thanks, Jason. So our main goals for our 2024 field season were similar to kind of the Wyoming study that you just heard. We wanted to know which species were using our structures, as well as if certain structures were preferred. And we also wanted to take note and keep in mind habitat trends and variables of perennial water, surrounding habitat, forested area, and just various ecoregions around Colorado. For our structure selection, we wanted to first address structures that were proposed for work within the next 10 years, just because we knew that could factor in if we find bats. We also paid more particular attention to major structures spanning perennial waters. And we also just wanted to get a diversity of structures in our selection, different elevations, different geography, different habitat, and various different structure types, as there are many. Back in 2023, our initial survey form was just a paper form. It was a little tedious to upload all of our paper forms into an online database after the fact, but it looked something like this. You've seen a lot of similar surveys, I'm sure. But just identifying structure types, surrounding habitat, again, water, elevation, that kind of thing. But we quickly realized if we were going to continue doing this, that we would save a lot of time and make our lives a lot easier if we transferred to a digital survey. All right, so we jumped into the digital age. We used Survey123. It created kind of a database that we could all use. It's very user-friendly. It allowed us to fill out these forms on our phone, provide pictures of the structures, and it made it easy to pull shapefiles and KMZ files for use in ArcGIS. So our latest survey form looks like this. It's very similar, except it's able to geolocate our locations and geolocate the pictures that we use. But overall, it's a very similar survey, I would say. It's still identifying the structure type. We also made sure to include the materials that were used for the bridge. So deck types, beam types. We wanted to note if there were any light features attached to the structure, as we knew that would maybe influence the bat's preference. And just, places to provide notes and really specific locations where we were pulling our guano samples from. But like Jason said, we knew that white nose syndrome was a huge factor, and we didn't want to be tracking PD fungus spores between structures. So we tried to follow a white nose syndrome decontamination protocol. This involved mostly spraying and scrubbing our hard hats and our boots, and using gloves. We sprayed it ourselves with isopropyl alcohol and kind of gave our boots and hard hats a good brush and tied our hair back, that kind of stuff, and just tried to at least take some precautions. We were still pretty unaware of what white nose syndrome looked like in Colorado, and we wanted to take every precaution that we could. So in our 2024 field season, we were able to sample 315 structures. Of the 315, we pulled 110 samples. That's not to say that there wasn't bat presence at other structures besides the 110. Some of them were maybe just too tall for us to access the guano and really high abutments. But we took 110 samples. I also like to note that we just got our full results back last week, so it's still pretty new information to us, but we want to share kind of what we know so far. These are our overall bat species counts of the 110 samples. 6 of those samples were likely to degraded and had failed analyses, and 4 of those were other species, bats and rodents. So we had 100 total bat species identified at 100 different structures, with our most prevalent being, of course, the little brown. This is just a good visual representation of some of the species that we were identifying. And these were our PD results from 5 different structures across the eastern half of Colorado, from up close to the Wyoming border all the way down a little bit south of Denver, north towards like Castle Rock, Colorado Springs area. 5 is pretty good, but not great. We were also fortunate enough to find some active day roosts. It was just from our field observations really that we noticed. Riley spoke a little bit about those slab type decks. And we tend to call these ones parallel box beams. They have a few inches of a gap in between these big flat slabs. And we noticed that bats really seem to like them. We found a lot of live roosts in just the few inch space between some of these cracks, and we noticed a lot of urine staining coming down from those, so that made it pretty easy to identify bat use and preference for structures like these. Going forward for our next field season coming up this summer, since we just got all of our samples back from the individual fecal samples, we'd like to move forward and start taking pooled sampling. So just to capture a greater diversity of species using the bridge. We know that capturing one piece of guano and getting one species isn't necessarily representative of how many species are likely using the structures. And like I said, we just got our data back, so we'd like to do a full kind of statistical analysis comparing structure types, water features, surrounding habitat, that kind of thing. And again, we did notice that our side-by-side girder style bridges were a very common preference for our day roosting bats. And we'd also like to capture humidity and temperature data for these structures, as it maybe gives us a more accurate representation of these microclimates under these bridges that bats may be drawn to. For 2025 and 2026 and beyond, as long as we continue this study, we'd like to continue coordinating with NABAT and providing them our data, as well as any other interested parties, other DOTs, Parks and Wildlife, Colorado National Heritage Program, and develop kind of a standard protocol for future monitoring and sampling of CDOT structures and how we kind of go about this as these structures are proposed for work. And then we'd also like to coordinate, with our white nose syndrome researchers to determine if these structures might need antifungal treatments in the future. That is about the full scope of our work for this time around. I'd just like to acknowledge all of our help from other parties and folks at CDOT, and we really couldn't have done this without all of the hands on deck or under deck.
Great, thank you, Annie and Jason, both for sharing, and thanks to CDOT for being part of the host organizations for the conference this week. Any questions from folks? Yes.
So based on your early data, just knowing now that bats are using bridges in the CDOT system more than you expected, has CDOT already started making any adjustments to operations or like what they're doing for bridge maintenance?
Not quite yet, since our study is still ongoing, but we are working hand in hand with our U.S. Fish and Wildlife liaison, and we plan to, so the study period is 3 years, and at the last year of the study and beyond, we're planning on sort of drafting deliverables and probably specifications as well. So we'll get into more of that sort of towards the end of the study.
Good job, guys. Good stuff.
Thank you.
I don't know a lot about bats, so my question is, what is the understanding of the population in general? And specifically, are we providing additional habitat through structures on the landscape, or is this kind of zero sum? They're just moving around. And I ask because if we are getting listings, claiming credit for creating habitat may come into play. I don't know if you know how to answer that yet, but I just thought I'd ask the question.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the nature of our study just to understand the different species that are using the structure and the different purposes that they're using these structures for. So we still don't know a lot of the answers to the questions that we asked, but CDOT for quite a while now has been, just as a sort of best management practice, been installing bat boxes on bridge replacements. But we're really not getting much evidence that they're being used. And we're not quite sure why. I think that based on the study that we've done, it seems like the preferences in the majority of the structures we looked at they're likely for temporary night roosts. And I think it's just more convenient for them as opposed to flying and climbing up into a box where they can just fly and hang on to a girder. So I think it's a convenience thing, maybe, that they're not using the bat boxes. And I think the bat boxes are more for day roosters and other purposes. So I suspect that's the reason, but I'm not really sure. But going forward, we might continue to include bat boxes on bridge replacements or provide extra habitat. But we're not really sure how that's going to look yet.
I'm curious if you're also incorporating, if you see bird use of the structures and keeping track of that secondarily.
Yeah, we kind of do that separately in a sense because we have to follow the Migratory Bird Treat Act, and so we do. Well, it's sort of a separate thing. So when we have a project that's going to be affecting a bridge, we have an internal project manager that goes out and looks at multiple different resources, and bird use is one of those. So it's not really incorporated into the study, but we still do look at them for project as part of project delivery.
Okay, last question.
It's kind of just a comment to add on to your thing. I think we are creating more habitat, yes, because I think like a lot of these bats, their ecology is to kind of scramble into rocks and whatnot, at least our Western species. And like Trina said earlier, like these are very cave-like in many respects. So I think we are building new habitat, so it could be useful. I think the question is, can it be an ecological trap like bat boxes could be? So that's the other counter to that, but very cool stuff.
Great, thank you, Jason and Annie.